today's Take 5, which I'm going to give, is on the subject of Jerusalem, and maybe a little bit on the subject of Israel. I was actually born in Jerusalem, which is why I volunteered to give the Take 5. And I was also raised with a very strong narrative relating to Israel and relating to Jerusalem that I got from my parents. I remember my father's narrative. Both of my parents came to Israel in 1974, and my father's narrative includes a story of him standing on Har Hatzofim, on Mount Scopus. And this was before the campus had been fully constructed as it is today. And at the time, in the mid-1970s, the view from Mount Scopus spanned the hilltops of Jerusalem. And my father, who is not a very... I hesitate to say that he's not spiritual, but he certainly doesn't talk about God much publicly. And the one comment that he has made to me many times, which feels to me like a very, very personal spiritual moment, is this comment about Jerusalem, this experience that he shared with me, about standing on Mount Scopus. He was working as a guard at the time, because he was an immigrant and he needed a job, as many immigrants do. And he looked out over the hilltops of Jerusalem from the top of Mount Scopus, which is known for it's called Mount Scopus because of the view. And he said that he felt in that moment that he connected with his ancestors, who had many, many ages ago lived in Israel and climbed the hills of Jerusalem. And for both of my parents, Jerusalem and Israel, but Jerusalem in particular, because this is where they lived, is a very deeply personal idea, and actually also very concrete, because they lived here for 7 years. So unlike my parents, until recently, I was not living in Jerusalem, I was living in America. And I was raised on their narrative. I was raised on the narrative of people who had moved to Israel, who had moved to Jerusalem, and who loved it with a really intense passion, which I might call spiritual and they might not. But whenever I visited Israel, I always visited as an American visiting. I visited my family, I visited with my parents who had their narrative, and it really wasn't until last year when I came to Jerusalem, to Pardes, to study here, that I started exploring more of Israel and more of Jerusalem beyond what my parents had shared with me, and in a more personal way. And the truth is, this is a message that many of us have heard in many different forms, and it's very challenging to be a student at Pardes and also to spend time outside of Pardes, because we all know that the schedules are really intense. I also, I wish I could make it easier, and I wish that a year were longer, because actually I'm not sure that in a year, if somebody's full-time at Pardes, they really have the time to invest themselves as much as ideally, I think, people of Jewish descent could and should. But that said, there is time. There is some amount of flexibility. And being in Jerusalem, many of us are within walking distance of the Kotel, for example. I mean, little things like that. And there are lots of corners in Jerusalem that really bear exploration, that maybe have not yet been explored, that you have not yet seen. So for me, the experience has been particularly personal recently because I've returned to Jerusalem, so I've explored corners of bureaucratic agencies that I have not yet seen. That's probably not the most exciting part of Jerusalem. But I've also explored museums, and I've also explored ancient landmarks. And I've explored some sites that my parents wouldn't have taken me to because they probably thought it was too dangerous. So that's the message that I want to share with all of you. And I think a lot of you already feel it and know it, that especially at this halfway point, since our year here at Pardes is pretty much halfway done and many of us are going back soon, maybe it doesn't feel so soon, but it's a few months away, I would just encourage you to reflect upon what opportunities you have, what minutes you have to spare, to take a look around and really absorb Jerusalem as much as possible, because it's really worth it. and it's your experience. It's not just the narrative that you were raised on, whatever that might be.
אני קם בעברית בבוקר, ושותה בעברית קפה, משלם בעברית ביוקר על כל דבר שאני